morning, everybody. Welcome back to America TV. Hi, I'm my trainer, one of the guides here at America, and we welcome our audience joining us online. We truly hope that you are doing well and staying safe amidst this outbreak. Well, anyway, for those of you who are first-timers here, hi, welcome to America TV for the first time. America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center. Our mission is to provide a space for young generations of Indonesia to learn more about the United States. We have temporarily moved to a solely digital platform, so you can enjoy our program from the comfort of your own home and help find the curve of COVID-19. Don't forget to leave your questions in the comment box below, and our panelists will answer them later in the seminar. And for our friends here who are joining us through Zoom, there are a couple of features that you can use to actively participate in the seminar. You can use the raise hand section to ask your questions with your video on, or you can also use the chat box section whenever you wanted to say hi to the other participant and also the panelist as well. But please keep in mind to use these features wisely, alright? Cool. Now today we will be having a session titled The Cultural Heritage of Nusantara Creativity. And as a friendly reminder for all of you, as continuation of our 10th anniversary celebration and Black History Month in February, we are having a very special activities with a giveaway this month. In this giveaway, we are giving out an iPhone 12 Pro. So make sure to stay tuned until the end of this event to know how to participate. Now I will break the ice a little bit with a social media quiz. Are you guys ready? Okay, here we go. The question is, which museum in the United States was the first ever to feature an exhibition of ancient Indonesian art? Is it A, the Smithsonian, B, the Museum of Modern Art, New York, C, the Guggenheim, or D, the National Gallery of Art? I will repeat the question one more time. Listen carefully. Which museum in the United States was the first ever to feature an exhibition of ancient Indonesian art? Is it A, the Smithsonian, B, the Museum of Modern Art, New York, C, the Guggenheim, or D, the National Gallery of Art? You can participate this quiz through our social media comment section, and stay tuned till the end of this event to find out if you get the answers right. Now, without further ado, please welcome our moderator for today, Bapak Tony Sugiarta from aNerd Gallery.
All right. Thank you and welcome everyone to this live streaming presentation of cultural heritage of the Nusantara creativity. Today's panel discussion is actually part of an upcoming series in which we would like to view creativity through the lens of the creative process that have been passed down through generations in the Nusantara region. This process, which has become an integral part of Southeast Asia, arts and culture, has since synergized with global contemporary culture. It has been acknowledged by the UNESCO through the inception of Indonesian Batik into the list of intangible heritage of humanity. And in this series, we will also explore the transformation and the relevance of this long-withstanding art process in the contemporary world. How would the sustainability of this cultural wisdom be impacted, as it seems to be in a complete contrast to the digital era, globalization, and economic pressure? It's a very huge topic with so many viewpoints, and we will break it down into different art forms and topics along the series, which we will mention at the end of the discussion. But today, as we are live streaming here at America platforms, we have three amazing panelists who are artists and educators. We have Nathaniel Kurniawan, a design and entrepreneurship educator at Ciputra University, Surabaya, Indonesia. Desmond Anabrang, a cultural and traditional arts activist who is an integral part of Babaran Segara Gunung Culture House in Yogyakarta. And joining us all the way from the United States, we have Sonja Dahl, an artist, a writer, a lecturer of contemporary art at University of Oregon. They have the first-hand experience in not just learning about them, but also using this Nusantara creativity in their practice and their daily life. So they will help us to break down and understand what this creative process is all about and how they support this cultural sustainability. For today's live streaming and discussion, we will each talk to the panelists individually. So they will briefly present and we will chat a little bit about their perspectives and positions around Nusantara creativity. Once we have talked to all three panelists, I'll bring them all back for a discussion with questions from all of you here. Do ask your questions or comments in the different channels, wherever you're viewing us from, and our team will pass out the questions and we will weave them into the conversation as well as we go along. And without further ado, I would like to invite our first panelist, Michael Nathaniel Kurniawan. And while he is preparing the speaker and presentation, I can read a little bit about his bio. Michael is a design and entrepreneurship educator at Ciputra University, Surabaya, Indonesia. He is one of the alumni of Kaufman Foundation Global Visiting Faculty Program and is the founder of the Center for Center Heritage Studies and its University Museum. He is a senior lecturer for the Visual Communication Design Department, School of Creative Industries of Universitas Ciputra. And he's also a research fellow for the Tracing Parents Foundation and an awardee of the Indonesia Endowment Fund for Education to study a graduate program at the University College London Institute of Education. And Pak Michael, yes,
Hello.
the floor is yours whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Tony. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening. Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, please. Okay. Thank you once again. First of all, I would like to thank aNerd for hosting this wonderful event, co-organized by Rumah Budaya Babaran Segara Gunung and Meet the Makers. It is truly a pleasure and honor to collaborate with many local and global partners today who share the same passion in art and culture. So the title of my presentation is Co-Creating Sustainable Heritage for Indonesian Creative Industry. There are several questions I would like to address in today's presentation. Sorry? Is it okay? Yeah. There are several fundamental questions on the topic of culture and creative industry posed by the committee. The first question is the concept of creative industry and how it is closely associated with economic gains and measurements. However, underneath this, I believe that we are actually trying to figure out the role and the position of culture in the current system of economy. This is actually the main issue concerning how to co-create sustainable heritage, and I believe that there are misconceptions that hinder us from finding the suitable answers. These misconceptions can be seen in the dichotomy of art and design, whether it is the mediums, institutions, education system, and its creative workers and creative processes, the dichotomy of cultural values versus financial values, culture as a thing of the past that is no longer relevant to the contemporary ways of living, and so forth. We have inherited these false dichotomies, and now we need to critically rethink most, if not all, of this dichotomy. Secondly, in doing so, once we are able to break down these dichotomies, we will have a fresh perspective on culture and the creative industries. And third, in relation to the dichotomy of cultural heritage as a past thing that seems to be irrelevant to the contemporary culture, we need to revisit the definition of cultural heritage. And fourth, in understanding that culture is alive, constantly changing, and affect every aspect of our life, we will be able to properly position cultural heritage in the creative economy. This is something that UNESCO has been trying to promote with its concept of culture and creative industry. And fifth, if we have the time, we will also talk briefly about what are the implication of these new insights to creative and cultural institutions and education system, both in the local, national, and global level. But please don't worry, I'm not going to ruin weekend mood with a bunch of theory. Rather, I would like to take you on a series of museum tour. So it's like a weekend holiday visiting museum. Okay. Uh, Again, I am a visual communication design and designer, also an entrepreneurship design and entrepreneurship educator. I teach art, world art and culture. And so in teaching this subject, I usually ask my students to create creative contents, new creative contents such as comic books, games, animations, and etc. I want my students to be inspired by past culture, just like how the world's renowned Hayao Miyazaki movie Spirited Away found its inspiration in Japanese cultural heritage. This is one of its famous character called the No Face that is inspired by Japanese traditional mask festival as presented, analyzed, and presented by Dr. Hiro Kajihara. Okay, so my eye-opening journey began when I got the opportunity to study in the US as one of the last Kaufman Global Visiting Faculty in 2011. During the road trip program, we visited several Ivy League universities such as Harvard, MIT, and Stanford University, among several others. And it was in Stanford that I went to the Cantor Arts Center. Inside the Cantor Arts Center, I found a really mysterious looking wooden sculpture from Mentawai, Indonesia. This is a figure of a gibbon. I wish my student would have been able to find something like this in Indonesia to inspire them to create characters like Miyazaki's Snowface. At that time, I did not know what a gibbon is or anything about the Mentawai culture. All I know is about Indonesian culture. All I know about Indonesian culture are wayang, batik, ancient Indonesian temples such as Borobudur, Prambanan, and many other sites. So this sculpture is something that is totally alien and inspiring for me. Well, later on, I read an article by Professor Raymar Sheffold. He is an expert anthropologist on Mentawai culture that made rather a controversial statement concerning this artifact. He basically said that the figure of a gibbon at the Cantor art is an authentic fake. It is authentic as it was made by Mentawai people, but it is a fake as it is really nice made to order souvenir, and that the artifact does not have any significant value to the Mentawai people and its culture. Therefore, I began to question, what is this artifact? Is it a cultural artwork because it was placed in a museum, even though it doesn't have any cultural significance for the community that made it? Or is it a pre-ordered design object made as a piece of decoration or souvenir? Or is it a fake artifact made to be sold in the black market? But why should not the Mentawai people create such objects if it's benefit them financially? Are Indonesian art and cultural workers unknowingly trapped in this false mindset of creating authentic fakes? This is one question that I would like to pose for us. And let's go on to the next museum. So in 2016, I received a scholarship from the Indonesian Endowment Fund for Education. I did my MA in Art and Design and Education in UK. I wish I went to US, but I got the opportunity to UK. And I got the chance to visit some of its famous museum. One museum is very close to my UCL campus, which is the British Museum. To my bitter surprise, Indonesian diverse cultural artifacts seems to fit in these three narrow cabinets. So inside the British Museum, there are three cabinets containing Indonesian heritage. I was so shocked because I thought Indonesia will have so many great artifacts to be displayed in the British Museum, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Some artifacts inside these cabinets are authentic artifacts. Sorry, but you may not be able to see it clearly. On the top middle of the cabinet, it's one of the Buddha's head from Borobudur. An ancient armor on the bottom right, a keris dagger and a few Hindu bronze figurines and a set of wayang and gamelan souvenirs. Now we know that when Raffles went back to UK, he also emptied the Kraton of Yogyakarta palace. But apparently all the treasures were stored somewhere else. It's not in display at the British Museum. Reflecting on the contents of these cabinets, I began to question what is the difference between original and valuable artifacts with mass-produced souvenir. Is this what Indonesia's culture heritage is all about? Again, I'm very concerned that we are too accustomed in making and selling souvenirs that in too accustomed in making and selling souvenir for the tourism industry that we forgot what culture really is all about. I'm not against the notion of having financial gains based on cultural heritage. I do think that cultural workers need to receive fair social and financial reward, but I am deeply concerned that we have lost perspective on what culture is. That is probably why we see policymakers position the management, preservation, and development of local culture underneath the Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Primary Education, and Ministry of Trade. And if we can see here, a lot of cultural workers in Indonesia recreate, mass produce these antique fake artifacts, right? So like this Buddha's figurine, Buddha's head. For the record, for some reasons, I prefer the creation of figure of a gibbon better than the mass-produced Buddha head, such as in this photo. I also want to know what you think about this. Maybe we can have a discussion afterwards. It is very interesting to discuss what is the difference between the figure of a gibbon compared to this mass-produced Buddha's head or mass-produced wayang or miniature gamelan set. So let's go to the third museum. This is the Asmolian Museum. My 2017 visit to the Asmolian Museum in Oxford gave me a revelation. So inside it, I discovered a panel, a quote by J.R.R. Tolkien, the creator of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy. And it said that the museum and its collection have and always been filled with countless of precious things. Now, precious things, if you remember the column, always said, my precious ring, right? So this quote cemented the idea for me that museum is the place to find design inspirations. In case you're wondering, Indonesia only has around 300 plus museums according to the 2015 data, while the UK has 2,200 plus museum. And in the US, it is amazing that they have 35,000 museums, over than 35,000 museums. After the visit to Asmolian Museum, I decided to investigate the relationship between the museum and design higher education. So I believe that the museum inspires us creative workers, artists and designers to create something new. The next place I would like to take you on is to the Stonehenge. The Stonehenge Visitor Center and Museum. There is this uh, wonderful cabinet inside of it, and this cabinet exhibited products of popular culture that was inspired or in any way wanted to be associated with the Stonehenge site and its cultural historical value. The description clearly explains how the creation of this popular culture attracts people from different generations to come and to learn about Stonehenge. Maybe they now added something from the latest Transformer movie. If you like Transformer movie, you might notice that they choose Stonehenge as the site for their epic battle scene. Now, it's not historically accurate, but that's how I remind my 7-year-old son at that time about our visit to Stonehenge before I tell him more about the real history of Stonehenge. It is how the younger generation makes heritage sites or cultural heritage relevant to their life. Popular culture creates a bridge for younger generations to learn about the past. So we look at our cultural heritage from products of popular culture. That is exactly why we need to think critically about the creation of new creative contents. This is where I studied for my MA. This is where I piece all of my puzzle. So it all comes back to the figure of the gibbon at the Cantor Art Center. I tried to create a replica of that sculpture as an artwork to criticize the way Indonesians tend to perceive cultural heritage as a mass-produced souvenir. But eventually, I wasn't able to create such replica. Rather, I made something new based on my design skill set. Then it struck me that this is what culture is all about. The preservation of cultural heritage is not about preserving the past as the way it was, but it's about creating a new heritage. This stainless steel figure of a gibbon is my cultural artifact. It is part of my living memory and life that shapes my understanding of what culture is and forever changes how I teach art and culture to my students. I'm not trying to create a new learning culture by having my students to create their own, a new heritage inspired by artifacts displayed at the University Museum, and in the process to also learn about their past cultural heritage from the creative process that they experience. This is my legacy for Indonesian designer. So this is the museum at Ciputra University, a very small museum, 12 cabinets of inspiration, what I call them. And this is Mr. Mark McGovern, the American Consulate General in Surabaya at the opening in 2018. So regarding the misconceptions of that lead us to where we are right now in the confusion of where we should position cultural heritage in the creative economy, I noticed that during my research, Indonesia's creative economy subsectors actually is an adaptation of the UK's creative economy in 2001. However, in 2014, the UK revised its subsectors and they include museum, galleries, libraries, and cultural education as part of the subsectors. However, in Indonesia, we don't know the real role of museum, galleries, libraries, and cultural education. So this is one evidence that we are still struggling to find out how to put, where to put culture in the creative economy. My next two slides, UNESCO Framework for Cultural Statistics offered a different perspective. As we can see here, and you can search on later on, it starts with the cultural domain. Intangible cultural heritage inspires the creation of all of these subsectors. So culture is not underneath one creative industry subsectors, but culture is the essence, is the source for every subsectors. So once again, I want us to think beyond the dichotomy of culture and financial, and I want to see culture as a holistic as possible. Okay, so this is my last slide. Heritage is co-created in the present based on the past for the future. Thank you. My time is up. I'll return this to you, Mr. Tony.
All right. Thank you for the relaxed tour around the museums all over the world and how you sum it up nicely that we should look at culture as something that is like holistic, that is not just financial, but also like how the roles of like the different institution, the museum, the galleries, and the education institution can work together to forward this cultural process and thinking in our contemporary world.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think I will move on to the second speaker first because of like the time allocation. So and then we have a lot of questions to ask, but yeah, we'll get that in the discussion session later. Yeah. And yeah, the second panelist, we have Desmond Anabrang. Desmond is a cultural and traditional arts activist, and he's an integral part of Babaran Segara Gunung Culture House in Yogyakarta, where he worked very closely on their cultural projects, setting up support system for the Culture House education program and selling wearable batik arts under the brand name Baragung. He received the Indonesian Endowment Fund for Education in Dublin College University for his graduate studies in cultural policy. And since COVID, he has been involved in an Indonesian contemporary art museum in Jakarta. And Desmond is fascinated with teachings about life and the messages that are embedded in the traditional art forms. And he thinks a lot about cultural policy and how these traditional art forms with tangible aspects could be brought into everyday life in a technological era and yet remain sustainable. So Desmond, when you are ready.
Yeah. Hi, Tony. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I will just start very quickly since time is very limited. Okay, so hi, everyone. I will try to make this as quick as possible and as laid back as possible since it's Saturday. So thank you for giving me the time to speak to you today about the cultural heritage and the creative process. My name is Desmond Anabrang, and I'm speaking on behalf of Babaran Segara Gunung Culture House. Cultural heritage and the creative process are for me quite a broad and big topic to talk about. There are many approaches that can be taken, but I think it would be better if I use the approach that we've been doing in our culture house for so many years, which is Batik. So as a young person who is passionate about cultural topics, I'm still in process in what I will talk about. Many of the materials I will present as the result of various discussion programs, exhibitions, or study groups taking place in our culture house. Even so, the material that I will present is a big part of what is often the mainstream of thought, especially when I hear the topic of cultural heritage. Having grown... Hello? Tony, the connection is okay, right? I can continue?
Yes, you can.
Okay, sorry. Having grown up in an environment that revolves around batik, I became more focused on the intangible aspect of batik practice. And this has become one of my main interests in growing and learning. I am sure that there are similar teachings in other mediums as well that have a culturally rooted creative practices, a kind of silver lining of life lessons that have been passed on to us through this tangible traditional media. It is, I believe, our duty as a global society to find a balance in this rapidly expanding technology. Like one Javanese philosophy says that in order to move forward, we must see what lies on all around our sides and most importantly, what lies behind us. Apart from all that, as a young person, I feel that by far my biggest asset is my enthusiasm, and a lot of hanging out, or in Indonesia we call it nongkrong, to transmit my enthusiasm to other friends of my generation. So that's what I will do with you guys today. First things first, I'm sure many of us already know or at least heard of batik. For those of you who may not know, batik is a wax resist technique, which means that the part that we draw using a tool called canting, as you can see in the picture, or also could be put as a pen version of batik, which is filled with wax as its ink, will then become resistant, so that after the cloth is dyed, the part we draw will remain like the previous color, and the part that was not drawn would then change color according to the type of dye that is applied. As you can see, this young woman over here is doing batik. It's in our studio, and it's not child labor. It's one of our workshops that we do with kids. So continuing on, today I will go through this very quick time travel with you to see a small aspect of the batik through time. Not only to show how batik has developed or to promote batik as an important icon, but to see the shift in motivation, meaning, and role of batik in society. But keep in mind that my goal is also not to discredit the development of the batik industry. What I want to show is that there is an intangible treasure left out somewhere on the way batik has developed. Perhaps there are other treasures around us waiting to be discovered and to be promoted in your own nongkrong sessions. Okay, so the serious part about batik. So the technique of patterning cloth through the application of wax reached its highest level of complexity on the island of Java. This is shown through one of the ancient texts, Serat Suluk Kota Gede, transcribed in the 19th century. The original text is believed to have been written first in the reign of Sultan Agung in 16th century CE, and to have been developed from even more ancient texts. The earliest believed to have been written in Sanskrit language on Java before the current era. And in this text, there is a section that specifically talks about batik, and it's called Suluk Ambatik. And we have come to know about all of this from our programs in the Culture House, where we've had the honor to have Pak Manu Widya Ciputra, which is an Indonesian scholar and philologist. So about the ambatik itself, at that time, women through ambatik studied creating miniatures of this universe and then given the way of caring for and preserving them. They learned that the divine was filled with loving kindness and graciousness towards those that truly had the desire to carry out puja, or known as a prayer ritual, and bhakti, or devotion. The implementation of puja and bhakti is called brata, vow to self-control. Now, ambatik is the path, the way that women carried out their brata, because ambatik at that time was required to also hold upacara, ceremonies, upakara, help others, show kindness, carry out offering obligation, and upawasa, fast, controlling the sensory organ, and also aswapna, wakefulness, watchfulness, and so on. And then the text ambatik shows that women that carry out the activity of ambatik are said to be women that are without defect and worthy of respect. Because when she ambatiks, she has to choose correct time and guidance to achieve a sacred day to begin the sacred batik. When she ambatiks, she faces the universe that has nature's wideness as the place that batikers rests their mind and intuitive sensitivity upon it. In this regard, the cloth that is to be batik with a certain citra, or which means a mental or visual text in the form of an image, requires her refined behavior, which is said to be the base of the cloth. The means that is used to draw the citra is the canting tool, and is in the form of pen of the divine. That chanting shows the way, and while this activity is being done, she sings praises to the divine. What is most important, though, in this process of batik is that which is shown on the wide open surface of the cloth, which is a form of maya, or the illusion or appearance of the phenomenal world. This is the essence of the divine itself that enters into the body and soul of the woman that is batiking and results in the process of ambatik. That which contains the essence has the character of utilizing the body and soul so that the cloth that is formed also becomes a piece of cloth that is pure, sacred, and perfect. Okay, as I promised, now we'll move on through time to the next. Hang on. Before we continue, I would like to say that in our culture house, we feel that this creative process and deep appreciation in making batik are currently an important focus, not in order to restore the batik process, or it must be as described in the ambatik text, but to realize that in the batik, there is such a deep creative process. Then this knowledge can become a provision for us to appreciate the culturally rooted creative process and apply it in the context of the contemporary creative process. A further explanation of the culturally rooted creative process learning method that we use at BSK will be presented at another time by my dad. I think Tony will tell us more about that later. So moving on, while deeply embedded in local traditions and associated with the social order of Java, outside of Indonesia, batik became a powerful cultural intermediary connecting countries as diverse as Europe, Japan, Africa, India, and Australia. Oh, sorry, forgot about that. That's an image of our studio and my dad. Anyway, so in the early stages, this process was an outcome of the Dutch colonial agency VOC. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Dutch East India Company sold Indian textiles destined for Indonesian markets, as well as small quantities of Javanese batik to the Japanese. It led to the introduction of Javanese motif in the Edo fashion, and ensued a centuries-long interest in Indonesian textiles. A large-scale dissemination of Javanese, A large scale of dissemination of Javanese iconography started at the end of the 19th century with the export of European copies of batik textiles to West African markets. Javanese motifs were enthusiastically received by African customers, and following a process of intensive adaptation, have become an integral part of African textile tradition and identity. Fun fact, VOC back in the day was as rich as all of these modern companies put together. That blew my mind. Anyway, this is the African batik that I mentioned. And then another outcome of colonial encounters was the introduction of batik technique to the Netherlands around 1890. A decade later, batik was practiced all over Europe and became a distinctive feature of Art Nouveau and Art Deco. Interest in the technique led to the introduction of Javanese motifs into European fashion and fine arts. For example, the work of Poirier, Van de Velde, Mackintosh, and Matisse. This is a portrait of Van de Velde. He's a designer from Belgium, became acquainted with the Javanese textile technique batik while on honeymoon in Holland in 1894. Began practicing it in 1902. Japanese, Indonesian, and other East Asian art techniques were highly popular at that time and were frequently employed to decorate home interiors. Now, the impetus mainly came from Dutch artists who had their batiks made by the craftspeople here in Indonesia. However, Van de Velde was convinced that art, craft, and industry should coexist on equal terms and had his batik produced by textile manufacturers in Holland, England, and Switzerland. Unfortunately, his effort to establish a batik as a subject in his art school, arts and crafts school in Belgium didn't work out. And I can only imagine what difference would it make if they had this batik in their arts and culture school in Europe in the 1920s. Anyway, and then here's another a different image of Paul Poirier in 1920s. Batik was extremely popular in Europe back in the days. In early 1920, Paul Poirier introduced batik evening coats after World War I, there were more than 30 batik workshops in Paris. That's crazy. And then here are some of the images of the nightgowns that were extremely famous back in the days. One of the most famous workshops was Madame Pangon. It was such a big hit back then. Here's an image of Madame Pangon's work. It was such a big hit back then that even the Princess of Romania wore one of her batik creation. And I think you can find that exact clothing in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. Anyway, moving on through time, Indian batik, there it is. More recent introduction in 1930s of the Javanese batik technique to West Bengal in India, and also a little bit later on into Australian Aboriginal communities, 40 years later to be exact, resulted from direct contact. For example, in 1927, a person called Rabindranath Tagore visited Java, and it led to this development of Bengali batik, which is now very widely known in India and in the world. While in Australia, batik was taught as adult education in remote areas. Artists came to Java to study batik, and in the 1990s led to a series of collaborative workshops between Indonesian and Aboriginal artists, and batik became a modern medium for expressing their ancestral legacy. Here's an image of Australian batik. So after traveling through this short time travel, we've been to quite a few places, and following the adventure of batik, we are back in Indonesia. For some of us, you may be in some other countries. Today, Saturday the 13th, February 2021, sitting in front of our computers, laptop, or phones, looking into the screen, sitting somewhere in your house, yet you're very connected to all of these other people from everywhere around the world, connected by the help of electricity and a technology we call internet. Imagine COVID-19 hitting us in 2001 or 2006 even. How would it be different? Well, aside from us playing Snake on our phone all the time, we wouldn't be able to do this new thing called webinar. In a lot of cases, we take these things in front of us for granted. It takes a very close look into what happens through time to really see how far we've reached, how much we've lost, and also how much we've gained. It takes even more digging in our mind to think of any world cultures we could easily experience nowadays, or even the creative process that comes with it. For instance, I could have sushi for lunch, watching Korean drama, having Thai tea afterwards, and after a day of doing batik. I hope that every now and then we could pause a moment, and with this same frame of mind, think at the things we have in front of us. Does my hand-woven grocery bag actually has a cultural context behind it? Does this tablecloth that we keep in a cupboard from our grandmother actually have any story behind it? And I'm glad that we still have traces of how batik reflects an intangible side of it, like how certain batiks are worn on certain occasions, like on weddings or on death rituals or whatever. However, this knowledge is not brought out to the front page of common batik knowledge. It is certainly not highlighted in the ever-growing massive batik industry. Today, batik is everywhere. It's sold on online platforms, malls, traditional markets, souvenir shops, and from the range of printed batik to traditional batik pieces. In Pekalongan, it is known that when Pekalongan is this but very famous batik city in Indonesia, in Java specifically. It is known that when the rivers are dirty and smelly, it reflects a booming batik business. Now, the next time we hold a batik, let's reflect on the story behind the text on batik, all of the creative processes that originated from the creating this one textile. Then let's think of how vast the culture of the world are. How possible is it that all of those cultural products we hold today might have this amazing story behind them? Then research on it, wear it with pride, talk to the people around us, but make sure that somewhere in our minds, we don't forget of how Achanting was once considered as a pen of the divine, and how this news 2 weeks ago was in Pekalongan, a flood with red batik color is reflecting a booming batik market. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Desmond. Have a great time nongkrong around and talk about the cultural context of batik, which is, I mean, we knew it as one of like the famous icon of Indonesia, but to understand it from that divine connection, as well as the different influences and incoming not just influence, but also excluence of batik around the region as well and around the world. And
yeah,
okay, I lost track of the time, but I think we are kind of like over. But I guess like we'll reserve all the questions at for the discussion session. So
sounds good. Thanks, Tony.
Let's move on to our third and the last panelist first. All the way joining us from the United States. So we have Sonja Dahl. Sonja is an artist, writer, and lecturer of contemporary art of University of Oregon. And her ongoing engagement in Indonesia began in 2012 with her Fulbright Fellowship and Asian Cultural Council. Asian Cultural Council supported art research projects exploring the cultural significance of textiles as they evolve, hybridize, and collapse the boundaries between tradition and the contemporary. Being a contemporary artist herself, Sonja also spent much of her research periods in Yogyakarta, immersed in and writing about the culture of collaboration, artist collectives, and participatory art in Jogja's contemporary art communities. And for this panel, Sonja will be reflecting on her evolving understanding of the power of human creativity based on her experiences studying, making, and teaching about art between the United States and Indonesia.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. This has been so much fun. I'm enjoying all these virtual tours of the world. Many places I can't visit, even though they might be close to me right now. The Cantor Art Center is very close to where my parents live in California. So it's lovely to see that, Pop Michael. So thank you, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen as well. Can everybody see that okay? And hear me okay?
Yes, we can see your slides and we can hear you. Okay,
good. So as Mas Tony said, you know, I'm an artist. I'm a writer. I've engaged in research about art, and I'm also a university lecturer about contemporary art. So I am involved in art in a lot of different ways. And so, you know, my primary context is as an artist myself. I consider myself a contemporary artist. Which is kind of a funny term, you know, when we talk about contemporary art and traditional art. Sometimes those distinctions are not very useful because I find oftentimes there's mixing. And I think, you know, I'm seeing messages in this about this from both of our previous speakers as well. But I'll be speaking mostly from the context of my experience and my identity as a contemporary artist myself, who is based in the United States. So what I would like to present is just a series of some open reflections about the creative process, and I'll be sharing just a few images, some images of previous projects that I've worked on, both individually and collaboratively. And those images are intended just to kind of give you something to kind of reflect on visually as I speak. So those images are just kind of metaphors for you to kind of reflect on. So let's move right ahead here. Nope. There we go. So I'd like to begin with some kind of open reflections about what it means to have creative roots. As this group of us have been kind of having discussions prior to this event, there's been a lot of discussion about this idea of rootedness, of creative rootedness, that there is a sense throughout Indonesia's cultures that there are these cultural and creative roots. And I think that these kinds of creative roots exist in many places, in many different contexts. But I'm interested in thinking about what that means, a creative root. So, the purpose of this webinar series, as we know, is to look at the cultural heritage of Indonesian creative process and artistic traditions as they relate to some of the contemporary pressures of industry and education and emerging technologies and the economic systems of global capitalism. Both Michael and Mas Desmond have touched on some of these things and the kinds of pressures that those systems exert on creative process. So we're here to think about the deep roots of cultural knowledge in many of Indonesia's traditional art forms and how they can continue to grow in the face of these larger pressures. But for me, as an outsider, as someone who is not Indonesian, I don't necessarily feel that I can speak with full sensitivity about the specific cultural context of Indonesian traditional creative processes. But I have been reflecting a great deal on this question of creative rootedness and how it relates to the cultural context that I come from as an American contemporary artist and educator who works with textiles and fibers. I also have a lot of questions about what it means to be rooted as an artist and what it means to be part of a lineage. Can I just make sure, Tony, is my voice coming through clearly? Because I'm also getting that little bit of feedback.
Yes, we can.
It sounds okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I hear myself talking to myself.
Yes,
all right.
We all do here.
Okay. So, in many of the conversations that circulate among contemporary artists working in craft media like fibers and textiles, like I do, and ceramics and woodworking, both in the United States and beyond. I hear a lot of people discussing whether it's possible to become part of a creative lineage, that one might not necessarily already have an attachment to through ancestry or anything like that. So this question of whether you can adopt a creative lineage, I think is very interesting. And it's a sometimes heavily contested topic. In my country, the only people who have true ancestral relationships to the land we live on and cultural traditions that tie them to it are those who are indigenous to the land. The rest of us and our ancestors are newcomers in many ways. The majority of the people in the United States are immigrants themselves or descendants of immigrants or colonists. So, being a descendant of immigrants or colonists often means that our lineages have been broken in some way, or that we've been separated from our ancestral roots through the process of assimilation into a new place. And this is a different sort of unrootedness than what I hear talked about a lot through my travels and time living in Indonesia. among artists and artisans. There, you know, I heard many stories about the very real loss of cultural and creative traditions that have been interrupted through outside forces, like the forces of colonialism, or any of the contemporary pressures that I mentioned before and that have been talked about already. So what I think is interesting in some ways, some of the observations that I've made is that many artists across North America, I see exhibiting signs or speaking about feeling that they have experienced a loss of creative roots and trying to find connectivity through studying or adopting the artistic traditions of other places. You know, I have the sense that many descendants of immigrants and colonists like myself desire the sort of cultural rootedness that is still alive in places like Indonesia, even though, you know, as we've been discussing already today, there are so many ways that those traditions have been interrupted and pressures exerted against them. You know, I have a sense that a lot of people really long for a creative lineage. Not everyone, of course. Many contemporary artists, you know, myself included, really appreciate the openness and freedom to explore that comes with being unattached to any one traditional system. So I think that's kind of interesting to think about the different ways that art operates, you know, whether it's sort of attached to a system or kind of this open, anything goes kind of way that the contemporary arts function globally. But things can, of course, get a little bit tricky when outsiders take from or adopt the creative processes and creative arts of another culture without developing a mutual relationship of trust and understanding. You know, this is where we hear a lot of conversations, very critical conversations in the arts throughout the United States about issues such as cultural appropriation, which is a discussion about the power dynamics between, you know, what belongs to whom and who has the right to use different art forms that belong, you know, that have a sense of it belonging to someone else. So, you know, a question about cultural appropriation would be, you know, if an artist like myself begins using Batik, you know, traditional art form of Indonesia, without really giving respect to that culture, you know, that could be a situation where people start to get uncomfortable because there's an imbalanced power relationship there. So, you know, I'm interested in many ways. I'm interested in all these kinds of complex questions, but I'm also interested in the ways that we as artists and artisans tend to our creativity, the ways that we care for our creativity and share it. In the United States, you know, as in many places, I think, there's this notion that one cannot be an artist without having talent or a creative gift of some sort. And often this notion of creativity is attached to individuality. So there's this pressure on emerging and young artists to prove themselves in some, you know, in some way, and often to do so with very little support network or roadmap or guidance or mentorship. You know, we often in the arts use words like inspiration to try to describe how creativity comes into us. And as I reflect about this, you know, these different kinds of language that we use to talk about creativity, I wonder, you know, is inspiration an individual experience? Is it something that only comes from the depths of one person? Or is inspiration something that sort of bubbles up from some kind of deeper collective place? And, you know, I don't have answers for those questions, but I think they're really interesting. At the University of Oregon, one of the classes that I teach is called The Artist Experience. And it's a large lecture class. I have over 200 students, most of which who are not studying about art, except in this class. And the class is intended to look at the contemporary art through the sort of lens of creative process and artistic practice. And I found it interesting in making the curriculum for this class. I found it really difficult to find writing or conversation among contemporary artists that discuss the creative process in its deepest and most essential forms. You know, we will talk about things like creative practice or making our work, but rarely do we talk about the more mysterious aspects of creativity. And I wonder, you know, perhaps that's because this deep well of creativity is something that is very difficult to explain in language. So I'd like to also just talk a little bit briefly about the ways that creativity is taught to young artists and how creative work is shared both locally and nationally and globally on these different levels. You know, I personally went to art school. I studied at an art academy to get my Master of Fine Arts degree. And I went to the school to learn how to be a professional artist. Which basically means how to develop and sustain a creative practice within the context of the contemporary art world. So all these kind of systems that exist, you know, how you exhibit your work in museums and exhibitions and navigate working with collectors and curators and all these different aspects of the larger system of the contemporary art. And now that I'm a university instructor whose job it is to try to explain this kind of terrain of the art to mostly non-artist students and what it means to be an artist in this context of the contemporary art, I find it really interesting that many of my students come to me to talk with me and to share a sort of deep longing and desire for creative connectivity. For many of them, art is like their safe place, their safe haven. It's the place they can express and explore themselves creatively. And they have this intuitive sensitivity and openness to the creative process, and then are often confused when they are encouraged in school to rely more on their ideas, you know, the sort of ideas, the concepts, than that sort of deep intuition. It's good practice, but art school can be very confusing. Now, in my experiences living and working in Indonesia, the best school I found was through nongkrong. We're going to talk about nongkrong again. I found nongkrong is a space, for those of you who don't know what nongkrong is, you know, it's like just a little bit more explanation. It's sort of this casual hanging out culture, you know, not based on scheduling or, you know, it just sort of happens organically, and it's wonderful. And something that is very important, especially in the art scene in Yogyakarta, where I spent most of my time living. But I found nongkrong is a space where creative ideas and materials and mutual support are shared, so that both the individual artists and the collective that they might belong to benefit, ideally. Of course, every group of friends has its drama, so you never know exactly how it's working. But Nongkrong is this wonderful space that is less formal than school. And engaging in Nongkrong with your artist friends allows for creativity to be kind of shared more openly and generously among friends and colleagues. So that was, in many ways, my experiences with Nongkrong in Indonesia's arts, whether it was visiting on the porch of someone's house in a village, or hanging out in an artist collective in Jogja, that the process of Nongkrong was really the place where I learned the most about creative sharing. So thank goodness for Nongkrong. And so I'd like to kind of wrap up with an allegory from my other creative practice, which is baking. It may seem funny to talk in a talk about art to talk about baking bread, but I have long felt that the process of baking sourdough bread is a wonderful metaphor for the creative process. So as a baker of sourdough bread, I have come to understand the creative process of making art through the creative process of making bread. So what you see here on the screen is the starter or the culture for my sourdough. It's a living substance made up of all these microorganisms that exist both in that goop there and in my kitchen, in the air. It's a community and it's alive. The culture, and I love that word, it's the starter or the culture. So the culture for bread can be shared. So I can give some of my culture to someone else and share it with them. And then what they make with it will have their own character. So I think this is a really beautiful metaphor for how we share the creative process as creative people. And the culture needs to be taken care of. I have to feed it every day. I have to keep it fresh. I have to engage with it and make things with it. So you can't just leave the culture sitting unused. It will die. It will kind of just sort of fall apart. But the culture, the starter, is the root of the creative process of making the bread. And it's the thing that makes the creative transformation happen. And without taking care of this culture, this starter, it would be impossible to make the raw materials of the flour, the water, the salt, or if we're kind of extending the allegory, the raw materials that we make our art from as artists. It would be impossible to make those materials become the bread themselves, a beautiful loaf of bread, which can be shared beyond the baker themselves. So if you take this allegory of the culture, the root of the creative process, it has to be cared for. It has to be tended. It has to be shared. It has to be activated and used through active participation. And in doing so, you're able to create something that is sustaining, that can feed someone's body and soul, a beautiful loaf of bread. And I feel that art is the same way, that art is something that feeds us as humans, that's essential to who we are. And so if we take our culture, our starter, and we mix it into a wonderful dough and bake it, transform it through the creative process in the oven, and create this beautiful loaf of bread or a work of art that we then share beyond our own space, our own studio, our own kitchen, that becomes something that builds meaning in the larger culture, which is what we all share. So, you know, the bread, you know, contains the sustenance, like I said, to feed and nourish both the body and the soul. But it relies on that mysterious fermentation from the culture to do so. So that's kind of the last reflection that I wanted to share with you. And thank you so much for listening. We all love nongkrong.
Yes.
That's the message.
Yes, it just happens organically. And yeah. And I would like now to open it up and invite all of you here to join in our nongkrong session. For those of you who are watching our live stream outside of Zoom, do comments on the various comment platforms there, and our team will let us know and we will weave them into the conversation, or you can type it in the Zoom chat as well. All right. Okay, while we are waiting for the questions to come in, probably I can just open up the questions to all three panelists first. And we are talking about creative process. In your opinion, is it only for creative professionals, art and artisans only? Yeah, anyone can. Probably Pak Michael, would you like to kick off the?
Sorry, can you repeat that once again, please?
Talking about creativity and creative process, is it something that only reserved for creative professionals, artists and artisans only?
Oh, okay, so that is one of the dichotomy that I would like to criticize. Actually, all humans are born creative. So we have this creative capacity to create values in our life and to make meanings. And so I think we live in a society that is disconnected. We are we only perceive creativity as part of our profession, as whether it is an artist or a designer or like a skill set that we need to acquire to be able to perform better in the future. But I believe that just as Desmond and Miss Sonja has mentioned, creativity is deeply connected in our life. We need to embrace our own creativity and cultural identity and see it as holistic as possible and not being fragmented. That's what I say. That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that question too. I think I really like what you said, Michael, too. I think it's good to kind of criticize and think about those kinds of dichotomies. One of the scholars that I really admire, Ellen de Sanayaki, she's done a lot of research about the creative work being done in both traditional cultures and, basically all over the world. And she's been reflecting on this question of the root of artistry in the world, in humanity. And she argues that, we call ourselves, our species, Homo sapiens, the wise or thinking being, but she argues that we could just as easily call ourselves Homo faber, the making being, or Homo aestheticus, the aesthetic being, because she argues that this kind of aesthetic process of making things and making them extraordinary, special through a creative process is absolutely intrinsic to being a human, and that it's one of the defining features of humanity. So I also argue that, yeah, anyone can be a part of and use the creative process, I think. But yeah, there are different ways of training and skills and knowledge that is passed along that I think is really precious as well. So yeah, interesting question. Thanks, Tony.
I think a lot of what I would like to say, I completely agree with Michael and with Sonja as well. It's within everybody, and I can imagine how vast the topic of creativity is, and I just feel that within around us there are so many breadcrumbs of what is left behind from creative people around us, just from our era or from the era before us, and it could be a thing to start looking into your creative process as well. It's all around you. It's here around us right now. It's here around us from the people before us, and everyone in the community that builds us up to today. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. Thank you all for sharing. I have one question here from, let me just open it up, from Diane Butler of Dharma Nature Time. So she mentioned that Sonja's talk reminds her that in 2017, the fourth Congress of Indonesian Diaspora that was held in Jakarta, and the keynote speech was by former president of the USA, who took up the importance of guarding tolerance and that it.
Is it Tony?
Yeah, I think Tony is frozen.
Yeah.
I think we should just proceed with the question. Anyway,
yeah.
I'll continue and read the question, Sonja. This is, I believe it's to you. Greetings, Sonja. Your speaking reminds me that 2017 for the fourth Congress of Indonesian Diaspora held in Jakarta, the keynote speech was by former President of the USA, Barack Obama, who took up the importance of guarding tolerance and that the ethos of Bhinneka Tunggal Ika should be an example followed by all nations. In that time, I wrote to former Ambassador of Indonesia to the United States, Dr. Dinopati, that my sense is that Indonesian diaspora is not only Indonesian people who live in other countries, but also people from other countries who reside in Indonesia or have ties to Indonesian culture, from the US, Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas. What do you think about this sense of diaspora in terms of mutual exchanges and Nusantara creativity?
Wow, Bu Diane, that's a really good and big question. Thank you. What do I think about the sense of diaspora in terms of mutual exchanges and Nusantara creativity? Well, I think, you know, it ties back to a little bit what I was reflecting earlier, this idea of being separated from one's ancestral roots in some way. And that can be just from going and living somewhere else, you know, and then you gain different perspectives. But I think absolutely there is something interesting that happens when people do spread around the world. And of course, that is the contemporary condition. Migration is constant, you know, and with migration, all of these different creative processes, art and food cultures are being shared all over. So I do think that through diaspora, some of the essential creative processes of different cultures, for example, from Nusantara, are shared. I don't know exactly if I've totally answered your question, but those are some of my reflections based on that. Thank you.
Can I add to Miss Sonja? Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you, Sonja. I think
Yeah.
I remember correctly, there is Professor Kwame Anthony Appiah, who at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Arts, once presented the idea of art and identity based on the cosmopolitan view. So I believe that this diaspora is related to cosmopolitan view. We can see it in a cosmopolitan view, saying that we are, all of us, citizens of the world in a global world, but we have, each of us, have our different cultural identity. So rather than accepting globalization that tries to create a uniform identity for all nation and all culture, the cosmopolitan view argues a position in which we, all of us, are citizens of the world with different identities. So it doesn't, it goes beyond nationality and geographic boundaries. I will be happy to consider Miss Sonja as one of Indonesian artists. Just to say, yeah.
Terima kasih banyak, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Michael. I think we have, oh, Tony is here. Okay, great. Thanks, Tony.
Yes. Thanks, Desmond, for jumping in. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, but no, okay. Not really. Please continue. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the next questions that we have here from Carol is very interesting ones. How to save Indonesian culture in this era? As we know that many young people are really love something that is popular, like a K-pop. What do you think? How can we introduce Indonesian culture and creative thinking?
Yeah. Can I answer that really briefly? I'm so excited about that question.
Yes.
It's a question that is posed by my students in school and the university. So I believe that, like my presentation said, we make meaning or we try to understand the past based on popular culture, products of popular culture. So the dichotomy that makes us think that past cultural heritage is not relevant to contemporary life, we have to get over with that. We have to think preservation is not just to preserve the thing of the past, but actually is an active co-creation process. It is a creative co-creation process to create new things in this present moment based on past values for the future. So when we understand that definition of cultural heritage, then we can see that it's okay to create new popular culture and have a strong critical awareness of what the values will be, the impact will be, and it's okay to have financial reward for what we create out of it. So we are living in an era, creative economy, creative industry, where if we don't create, we are consumer. We consume other popular culture such as K-pop. The way to save Indonesian culture is to create a new culture based on Indonesian past, so that we can produce and we can also share it to the world through the creative economy. So that's how we compete in this creative economy system. But we have to do it critically so that we are responsible for what we create. One of my colleague, professor at Taiwan, uh, shared his portfolio, but there's one interesting statement that he said before he shared his portfolio. He said, "I'm sorry if my work is a bit vulgar, is sexually vulgar." So in a sense, I get this feeling that he's actually embarrassed in saying that I create something that is that the market wants, but it is not according to my sense of morality or cultural background. So we need to think critically about what we create. We are creating a future cultural heritage. That's it. Sorry.
Desmond.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was trying to press the mute button. You saw that. Anyway, I find this question very interesting as well. I would like to say that maybe it's not a term to say saving Indonesian culture in this era, because the culture, it is being developed by us today. It's a living being. And what we build within our nongkrong times, what we share with our friends, what we wear, it will become the culture. It is us that will become the root in some time in the future. So actually, Korea is an example of a very good. They have a very good cultural policy. Excellent cultural policy, and how they can talk about their culture and bring it outside of their country and be proud of their culture as well. So I think one of the key thing here is to look at what Korea has developed as a thing to study from. How they embrace their culture and how they brought that with excitement within pop culture itself, and it becomes the Korean culture that we see on TV today. So I think it all depends to us, to our friends, especially my generation, Spot Michael's generation, and Tony's generation. We're the one that will be building it. So yeah, that's what I have to say. Thank you, Tony.
How about you, Sonia? Do you have any insights as in comparison to the schools in the United States?
Yeah, I think kind of jumping on what both Michael and Desmond have said, culture is something that is constantly being created. And it may seem crazy to say, but I didn't even really understand that fully until I came to Indonesia, until I took myself out of my context and assimilated into another culture. And I will admit, maybe I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but I came to Indonesia, kind of searching for some kind of, authentic connection to different art cultures. I'd been working with indigo dye for a long time, and I wanted to really understand indigo dye in one of its, indigenous context. But as Pop Michael has talked about quite a bit, the authentic fake, I found, I was surprised to find that, there's all different kinds of recreations of how people work with this substance, and how people make different things, both in Indonesia and elsewhere that I visited. So yeah, I came away with, from my experiences, and continue to kind of think very critically about and openly about the ways that culture is constantly in a process of being created. So I agree with both Michael and Desmond that there is a sense of responsibility, in being a creative person, in making and sharing creative work. And caring about culture, caring for the culture. You don't want your bread to fail. You got to take care of that culture. But to understand that, yeah, it's dynamic, and culture has, the creative arts have always been influenced by things going on in the world around them. So there is nothing sort of static. But I think, the heart of the question, I think I really understand. There's good reason to be concerned about losing something. That is definitely possible. And I come from a culture where many people have lost their creative roots, and I see senses of how that can impact people as well. So I would empower the questioner to become a cultural activist as well. Just like Desmond.
Yes, thank you so much to all the three panelists who joined us today. Unfortunately, I have been warned by the organizers that we have run out of time, and that will be our last question for the day. I truly apologize for everyone who have sent in their questions. And just before we end off, I just would like to conclude today's session on our cultural heritage of the Nusantara creativity. Pai Michael mentioned about the cultural and the economic relationship of our culture in the modern contemporary world, and how the different institutions, the museum, the galleries, and the schools could actually synergize in forwarding the safeguarding of this cultural heritage process. And Desmond mentioned about using an example of a batik, that culture is a living thing and it will continue to evolve, and how we can use that creative process and how it can adapt and transform in our contemporary world. And Sonja mentioned about the finding roots in the cultures, as well as the notion of the individuality versus the collective notions of an artist or a creative process in their work. And of course, we have talked about the difference, comparing and contrasting between Indonesian and American and culture in the global world as well. And these are actually a very small part of our discussions, and this is actually the start of a whole series of creative process, the Nusantara creative process, that is organized by Meet the Makers Indonesia and Babaran Segara Gunung Culture House. Yep. It is a monthly series of talks talking about different aspects of the creative process according to different topics, be it technology, working with Mother Nature, as well as different art forms such as textiles or the shadow puppets, the wayangs. And that, okay, here we go. Yeah, so this is the Cultural Heritage of the Nusantara Creative Process webinar series. Today being the first one, and the next 4 will be starting in March. It is a monthly seminar, monthly webinar talking about tradition, creativity, and technology, and then creativity in working with the earth, and then ecology of place, the role of identity in creativity, and finally the shadow puppets and the creative process for millennial culture of the Nusantara. And for more information, you can go to the next slide. Yes, so you can contact all this through these emails as well as the relevant Instagram accounts. And with that, we thank you so much for joining us this morning in our chit chat nongkrong session. Hope you learned something about the Nusantara creative process, and we shall see you in our next webinars. And I shall hand it over to the guide.
Thank you so much, Pak Tony, and the rest of the speakers. That was a very inspiring session. We hope to see you again another time. In the meantime, the rest of you, please don't go anywhere, because I have the name of the winner for our social media quiz today. Earlier in this event, I asked you guys, which museum in the United States was the first ever to feature an exhibition of ancient Indonesian art? And the right answer is D, the National Gallery of Art. And our winner for today is Adi Nugroho from Facebook. Congratulations, Adi. As I mentioned earlier in the beginning of this event, aNerd is having a very special activities, and we're giving out an iPhone 12 Pro. And how do you participate? You can participate by posting a picture of 10 lines poem of your own creation and post it on your Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and simply tag us on social media account at aTAmerica. For further information, please visit bit.ly/bhmexpress. Now, you may be wondering, how can I develop an awesome idea for a place like this? Easy. You can go to our website at www.atamerica.or.id, click create an event, and collaborate with us. All proposals coming to us will be reviewed, and your event might be featured here soon. And while you're on our website, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletters for weekly event updates sent straight to your inbox. Alright everybody, I think that wraps up this episode. It has been really fun, but unfortunately, we have to say goodbye for now. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at aTAmerica for event update, fun content, and so much more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much everybody for tuning in. Happy weekend!